The flames crackle. The crowd murmurs. In the medieval world, justice was not blind, it was cruel. A man could be condemned by fire, by water, or by steel, and mercy was rarely offered. Fear was the law. Punishment was the spectacle. And the truth was darker than we dare to remember. If history's shadows grip you, leave a like to keep the fire burning, and subscribe to Nighttime Historians so you never miss what lies hidden in the dark. Tonight, we uncover the dark truth about medieval justice. The bell tolls once. Twice. 3 times in the grey dawn mist that clings to the stones of Canterbury like the breath of dying men. In the year of our Lord 1347, justice wears the face of kings and speaks in tongues of fire and iron. Here, where cobblestones drink deep of morning dew and something darker still, the very air tastes of fear and desperate prayer. A woman kneels in the mud before the courthouse steps, her hands pressed together so tightly that blood seeps between her fingertips. She whispers words that have no power save in her own breaking heart, a mother's plea for a son who will not see another sunset. The crowd gathers like carrion birds, their faces pale in the torchlight that still burns though day has broken. They come not for entertainment, but because they must. Because in this world carved from shadow and scripture, justice is a spectacle that demands witness. The great oak doors swing open with a groan that echoes through the square like the earth itself splitting apart. From within comes the scent of beeswax candles and something else, something that speaks of desperate men making desperate choices in desperate times. The bailiff emerges, his face a mask carved from weathered stone, and reads from a scroll that might as well be written in blood for all the mercy it contains. By order of His Majesty's court, and in accordance with the ancient laws of this realm. The words drift across the assembled crowd like smoke from a funeral pyre. They speak of crimes and punishments, of guilt determined not by evidence but by ordeal, of justice that flows not from wisdom but from tradition as old and immovable as the stones beneath their feet. This is the world where God's will is measured in screams, where innocence and guilt are determined by whether flesh burns or floats, where the powerful write laws in the blood of the powerless. The mother's whispered prayers grow louder, more desperate. She knows, as they all know, that in this place where shadows gather and judgment falls, mercy is a luxury afforded only to those who wear crowns or carry purses heavy with gold. The rest, the vast, struggling masses who till the soil and tend the animals and build with their bare hands the very foundations of this realm, they receive justice of a different sort entirely. A torch sputters and dies in the morning wind, its smoke curling upward like a soul departing flesh. The symbolism is lost on no one. In medieval England, in this year when death walks among them in the form of plague and famine, justice has become something terrible and necessary, something that devours the innocent and guilty alike with equal hunger. The courthouse stands before them not as a temple of fairness, but as a cathedral of fear. Its stones have absorbed centuries of desperate pleas, of verdicts that split families apart, of sentences that transformed human beings into cautionary tales whispered around fires on cold winter nights. The very mortar between its stones seems mixed with tears and ground bones of those who sought justice and found only the cold machinery of power grinding on, indifferent to their suffering. But what is justice in a world where God's silence grows longer with each passing day? Where plague takes the innocent and guilty with equal appetite? Where kings rule by divine right but practice by mortal cruelty? The answer lies not in the law books bound in leather and locked away in monastery libraries, but in the mud-stained faces of those who gather each morning to witness the terrible theater of judgment. The bailiff's voice continues, reading charges that sound like incantations, listing crimes that blur the line between desperation and evil. But his words are merely the surface of a deeper, darker truth, that justice in this age is not about right and wrong, but about power and its absence, about who wields the sword and who kneels beneath its shadow. As the sun climbs higher, burning away the mist but not the fear, the first defendant is brought forth. He stumbles, not from weakness but from the weight of chains that have rubbed his ankles raw. His crime? stealing bread to feed children whose ribs show through their skin like xylophone keys played by starvation's relentless song. His guilt? Determined not by witnesses or evidence, but by his inability to pay the fine that would purchase his freedom. This is the truth they do not write in chronicles or sing in ballads. That medieval justice was a marketplace where verdicts were sold to the highest bidder, where the scales of Lady Justice were weighted not with righteousness but with gold. The poor received justice swift and brutal, while the rich received justice purchased and postponed, delayed and diminished until it became something else entirely, privilege wearing the mask of righteousness. The crowd shifts restlessly, their faces reflecting not bloodlust but recognition. They see themselves in that chained figure, see their own desperation made manifest, their own hunger given form and dragged before the terrible machinery of medieval law. They understand that they witness not justice but its absence, not divine judgment but human cruelty dressed in ceremonial robes, and speaking in Latin phrases that might as well be curses for all the comfort they provide. And still the mother kneels, and still her prayers rise like smoke into the indifferent sky, and still the wheels of justice grind on, crushing bone and spirit with equal efficiency. This is the world we have inherited, the foundation upon which all later justice was built, a foundation of fear and desperation, of power unchecked and mercy rationed like bread in a siege. The bell tolls again, marking not the passage of time but the passage of souls from hope to despair. In the medieval world, justice was not blind, it was simply looking the other way, its gaze fixed upon those who could afford to purchase its attention, while the rest were left to face the darkness alone. Deep beneath the cathedral's foundations, where daylight never penetrates, and the air tastes of centuries-old dampness, the true machinery of medieval justice reveals itself. Here, in chambers carved from living rock and sealed with iron doors thick as a man's torso, the preliminary rituals of judgment unfold like a dark liturgy sung in whispers and screams. The constable of the tower descends stone steps worn smooth by the feet of countless condemned souls. His torch casts dancing shadows on walls that weep moisture like tears, illuminating carvings that seem to shift and writhe in the flickering light. These are not decorations but warnings, grotesque faces twisted in eternal agony, hands reaching from stone as if trying to claw their way back to the world of the living. In cell 7, a merchant from York huddles in straw that reeks of human waste and despair. His crime: failing to pay the crown's taxes during a year when his crops rotted in the fields and his livestock died of murrain. His punishment: to remain here until his family can raise the sum demanded, or until death provides the only escape from this underground purgatory. The irony is not lost on him. He is imprisoned for lacking money, and can only be freed by paying money he does not possess. The merchant's neighbor in cell 8 was once a knight, his armor now traded for rough burlap that barely covers the welts and scars that map his body like a geography of suffering. Sir Edmund of Westshire fell from grace not through cowardice or betrayal, but through the simple act of questioning his lord's decision to burn a village suspected of harboring grain thieves. The grain was never found. The village children's screams still echo in his nightmares. "Justice," he whispers to the darkness, his voice barely human after months of breathing air thick with mold and hopelessness, "is the luxury of those who never need it." Above them, in the courthouse proper, the morning's proceedings begin with all the pageantry that medieval authority could muster. Judge Aldrich the Severe takes his place upon a throne carved from a single block of oak, its surface stained dark with age and something that might be blood. Behind him hangs a tapestry depicting the Last Judgment, its golden threads catching the light of candles arranged in patterns that speak of ritual older than Christianity itself. The court officials file in like monks attending matins, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. There is the clerk, Brother Marcus, whose quill scratches against parchment with the sound of bones breaking. There is the executioner, a man so enormous that doorways seem built too small for him, his presence a reminder that every verdict carries the possibility of finality. And there is the royal prosecutor, Thomas de Grey, whose silver tongue has sent more souls to their Maker than plague or famine combined. But it is the absence of certain figures that reveals the true nature of medieval justice. There are no advocates for the poor, no scholars of law to interpret the complex web of statute and precedent. There is no jury of peers, for what peers could a starving peasant claim among lords and merchants? There is only authority and its absence, power and its hunger, judgment falling like an axe blade guided not by wisdom but by the invisible hand of political necessity. The first case called concerns a woman accused of witchcraft, that most convenient of crimes, requiring no evidence save suspicion and no proof save the testimony of neighbors grown weary of her poverty and desperation. Goodwife Helen enters the courtroom like a ghost already condemned, her bare feet leaving bloody prints on stones that have witnessed 10,000 such entrances. She was once beautiful, they say, before 3 children died in her arms and her husband fell beneath a lord's warhorse. Now she is something else, a symbol of all that this society fears about its own fragility, its own proximity to chaos and loss. The accusations flow like water over stone, each charge more absurd than the last. She was seen talking to ravens. Her cow gave sour milk the morning after she quarreled with the miller's wife. A child fell ill 3 days after she looked upon him with what witnesses describe as malice aforethought. The evidence is a tapestry woven from coincidence and malice, from ignorance, and the desperate need to blame someone, anyone, for the suffering that pervades their world like morning fog. Judge Aldrich listens with the patience of a cat watching a mouse hole. He has presided over hundreds of such cases, and they blur together in his memory like faces in a fever dream. The specifics matter less than the function. These trials serve to remind the population that authority watches, that transgression brings consequence, that the social order holds firm even when everything else crumbles. "Have you consorted with demons?" he asks, his voice echoing in the vaulted chamber. "No, my lord," comes the whispered reply. "Have you cast spells or hexes upon your Christian neighbors?" "No, my lord." "Have you renounced your baptismal vows and embraced the darkness?" "No, my lord." The denials mean nothing. In the medieval system of justice, accusation and guilt were often indistinguishable, separated only by the formality of trial, a trial that served not to determine truth but to provide legal justification for decisions already made. The outcome was determined not by evidence but by politics, by the need to satisfy public anger and private grudges, by the eternal requirement that someone must pay for society's accumulated sorrows. Outside, storm clouds gather with ominous purpose, their shadows racing across the countryside like harbingers of divine displeasure. The wind picks up, rattling shutters and setting dogs to howling in harmonies that sound almost human. It is weather that seems to mock human pretensions of control, that reminds all who witness it that there are forces beyond mortal authority, powers that cannot be tried or imprisoned or executed. But inside the courthouse, the machinery of human judgment grinds on, indifferent to the growing storm. Brother Marcus's quill continues its scratching rhythm, recording for posterity the carefully worded lies that will transform this broken woman into a cautionary tale. The executioner tests the edge of his blade with a thumb that has grown calloused from such testing. Judge Aldrich contemplates the political implications of mercy versus the social necessity of example-making. The trial proceeds through its predetermined stages like a dance whose steps were choreographed by fear and performed by desperation. Witnesses testify to impossibilities presented as facts. Evidence is produced that would convince no one who did not already believe. Legal precedents are cited that exist only in the fevered imagination of those who mistake cruelty for justice. And through it all, Goodwife Helen stands in her chains like a scarecrow built from human wreckage, her eyes fixed on some point beyond the courtroom walls, beyond the temporal world entirely. Perhaps she sees the children she lost, calling to her from a place where neither judges nor executioners hold sway. Perhaps she sees the husband who loved her before the world ground him beneath its wheel. Or perhaps she sees nothing at all, having retreated so far into herself that the court's theatrics cannot reach her. The architecture of medieval justice was built not from stone and mortar but from fear and necessity, from the desperate need to maintain order in a world that seemed always on the verge of collapse. Its foundations were sunk deep in human nature's darkest impulses: the need to blame, to punish, to transform suffering into meaning through the alchemy of ritual violence. As the morning wears on and the storm outside grows stronger, the terrible truth becomes clear. This is not justice at all, but its opposite, dressed in justice's robes and speaking justice's language while serving entirely different masters. It is order purchased at the price of righteousness, stability bought with the currency of human dignity, peace maintained through the careful cultivation of terror. The bell tolls the hour, its bronze voice nearly drowned by thunder that seems to shake the very foundations of the earth. In cell 7, the merchant counts stones in the wall for the 1000th time. In cell 8, the fallen knight prays for a death that will not come. And in the courtroom above, the grand performance continues, justice and injustice dancing together in a waltz that has played for centuries and will play for centuries more, its music written in minor keys and its steps marked out in blood and tears. Dawn breaks reluctantly over Blackmoor village, its pale light filtering through clouds that hang low and heavy as a burial shroud. The River Thame runs dark beneath the stone bridge where they will test Sarah the baker's innocence, its waters carrying whispers of all the secrets and sins it has swallowed over the centuries. Today, those waters will either embrace another soul or reject it, for in the medieval world, truth was something that could be extracted from flesh and bone, wrung from the unwilling body like wine from grapes. The villagers gather along the river bank like mourners at a funeral, their faces reflecting the grey sky above. They come not from bloodlust but from duty, the same inexorable force that brings them to church each Sunday and to harvest each autumn. This is the rhythm of medieval life, measured not only in seasons and holy days but in trials by ordeal, in moments when the divine will supposedly reveals itself through human suffering. Sarah stands between two bailiffs, her wrists bound with rope that will serve a dual purpose before this day is done. She is 43 years old, mother of 7 children, baker of the finest bread in 3 shires. Her crime? Selling loaves that were 2 ounces light according to the royal inspector's scales, scales that somehow always found fault when the seller lacked sufficient coin to purchase the inspector's favor. Father Benedict arrives with his worn leather satchel containing the instruments of divine judgment. His face is a map of inner conflict, etched with lines that speak of too many mornings like this, too many moments when God's will seemed indistinguishable from human cruelty. He has blessed these ordeals for 27 years, and each one has left him slightly more hollow, slightly less certain that the divine presence he invokes actually inhabits these rituals of pain. Brothers and sisters, he begins, his voice carrying across the water with the authority of centuries of tradition. We gathered to witness God's judgment upon Sarah, wife of Edmund the baker, accused of theft through false measure. Let all who doubt the Almighty's power to reveal truth through trial observe and be instructed. The crowd murmurs its assent, but the sound is flat, lacking conviction. They have witnessed too many ordeals, seen too many patterns to maintain simple faith. The guilty sometimes survive unharmed while the innocent bear scars that never heal. The wealthy rarely face ordeals at all, their guilt or innocence determined through less arduous means. Testimony of character witnesses, payment of fines, ecclesiastical intervention. Brother Thomas, the monastery's chronicler, stands apart from the crowd, his stylus poised above the wax tablet where he will record another chapter in humanity's long catalogue of desperate expedients. He has written accounts of 43 ordeals by water, 17 by fire, and 6 by combat. The patterns he observes would disturb anyone still capable of surprise. Survival rates correlate suspiciously with social status, with the accused ability to provide donations to the church, with the political usefulness of their guilt or innocence. The ordeal begins with prayer, as all medieval spectacles must. Father Benedict raises his hands toward heaven and intones words that have been spoken at 1,000 riverbanks, over 1,000 trembling souls. Almighty God, righteous judge of all creation, we beseech thee to make manifest thy will concerning this woman. Let the waters, which thou didst use to cleanse the world in Noah's time, now serve to cleanse our community of falsehood and reveal the truth that lies hidden in human hearts. Sarah closes her eyes and moves her lips in silent prayer. What words could encompass her desperation? What plea could bridge the vast gulf between human need and divine inscrutability? Her children wait at home, hungry bellies gnawing at empty air, depending upon bread she can no longer bake if the guild revokes her license, no longer afford if the court imposes fines that exceed her family's entire yearly earnings. The theological reasoning behind trial by ordeal rests upon a foundation that appears solid until examined closely. If God is omniscient and just, the theory goes, he will not allow the innocent to suffer unjustly. Therefore, survival of the ordeal proves innocence, while injury or death confirms guilt. It is logic that seems unassailable until confronted with the messy reality of bodies that burn regardless of moral standing, waters that accept or reject based on lung capacity rather than spiritual purity. But doubt is a luxury that medieval society cannot afford. In a world where every harvest might fail, every winter might bring famine, every stranger might carry plague, the community requires certainty even when none exists. The ordeal provides what rational investigation cannot: decisive answers to impossible questions, divine sanction for human judgment, the comforting illusion that justice flows from heaven rather than from the very earthly concerns of those who wield power. The bailiffs lead Sarah into the water, step by careful step, until it reaches her waist. The current tugs at her rough woolen dress, trying to pull her downstream toward London and the sea beyond. She shivers, though whether from cold or fear, none can say. The rope that binds her wrists now plays its second role. It will determine whether she sinks like stone, proving innocence, or floats like wood, confirming guilt. If thou art pure of heart and free from the sin whereof thou art accused, Father Benedict intones, his voice growing thin as doubt gnaws at his certainty, then may these holy waters receive thee as they received our Lord in baptism. If thou art guilty of theft and deception, may they reject thee as they rejected the sins of the world in the time of the flood. The logic is as brutal as it is simple. Innocence will be rewarded with near drowning, while guilt will be punished with survival. It is a system that transforms mercy into cruelty and makes victims of those it claims to protect. Yet it persists because it serves functions that transcend justice. It provides spectacle to entertain the masses, ritual to satisfy their religious sensibilities, and finality to resolve disputes that might otherwise fester like untreated wounds. Sarah takes a deep breath and surrenders herself to the water's embrace. The river closes over her head with barely a ripple, as if it has swallowed countless women before her and will swallow countless more before the last judgment comes. The crowd falls silent, even the children sensing the solemnity of this moment, when human life hangs suspended between elements, between earth and water, between guilt and innocence. Seconds stretch like hours. The rope grows taut as Sarah's body seeks the surface, as her lungs scream for air, as the most basic instincts of survival war against the artificial constraints that bind her. Somewhere beneath the dark water, a woman who has spent her life feeding others faces the possibility that her final act will be drowning for the crime of selling bread. Brother Thomas scratches notes on his tablet, recording details that will matter to future scholars trying to understand how a society could mistake cruelty for piety, how human beings could convince themselves that torture revealed truth rather than simply revealing the limits of human endurance. He writes of water temperature and current strength, of rope thickness and knot placement, of all the mundane factors that determine survival or death in ordeals that claim to measure divine favor. The social mechanics of the ordeal extend far beyond the accused. Village hierarchies are reinforced each time a poor person faces judgment that a rich person would never endure. Religious authority is strengthened each time a priest claims to interpret God's will through human suffering. Political power is consolidated each time legal dispute is resolved through spectacle rather than investigation. Father Benedict counts silently, his eyes fixed upon the surface of the water where bubbles mark Sarah's location like prayers made visible. His faith has been eroded by too many ordeals that seem to reveal nothing but the arbitrary cruelty of existence, too many moments when God's supposed justice looked suspiciously like human vindictiveness dressed in ceremonial robes. 20 seconds. 30. 40. The crowd grows restless, shifting weight from foot to foot, murmuring prayers that sound more like incantations. They want resolution, one way or another. They want the terrible tension of this moment to break, want to return to their ordinary lives where justice is someone else's burden and moral complexity can be set aside in favor of simple survival. At 50 seconds, they pull her up. Sarah emerges from the water like something reborn, gasping and choking, her face blue with cold and oxygen deprivation. Water streams from her hair, her clothes, her very being, as if the river itself is reluctant to release its hold upon her. She lives, which in the twisted logic of the ordeal means she has failed its test. The waters reject her, Father Benedict announces, though his voice carries no conviction, no triumph, only the hollow echo of duty performed without belief. Let it be recorded that Sarah, wife of Edmund the baker, has been judged guilty by divine ordeal of the crime of theft through false measure. But even as he speaks the prescribed words, doubt gnaws at his certainty. What if lung capacity matters more than moral purity? What if the thickness of rope determines outcome more than the weight of sin? What if these ordeals reveal nothing but humanity's desperate need to believe that suffering serves some purpose higher than mere cruelty? The crowd begins to disperse, their appetite for spectacle satisfied, their need for certainty temporarily fed. But questions linger in the air like morning mist, questions that will follow them home and haunt their dreams. They have witnessed judgment, but was it justice? They have seen divine will manifested, but whose will was actually served? Sarah stands dripping on the riverbank, alive but condemned, breathing but guilty, saved from drowning only to face penalties that may prove more deadly than the water ever could have been. Her children wait at home, unaware that their mother has been transformed by ritual from provider into pariah, from baker into criminal, from human being into cautionary tale. The medieval ordeal reveals truth, but not the truth it claims to seek. It reveals the desperate lengths to which human societies will go to maintain the illusion of divine sanction for human judgment. It reveals the ease with which suffering can be mistaken for significance, pain for purification, survival for guilt. As the sun climbs higher and burns away the morning mist, the river Thame continues its eternal journey toward the sea, carrying with it the memory of another soul tested, another life weighed in scales that measure everything except justice. The water runs dark and deep, holding secrets that will never surface, truths that will never be revealed by ordeal or any other human invention. Brother Thomas closes his tablet and walks away, his chronicle one entry longer, his faith 1 degree weaker, his understanding of human nature 1 shade darker. He has witnessed divine judgment, he tells himself, but the divine seems strangely absent from the proceedings, leaving only humans doing what humans have always done, inflicting suffering upon each other and calling it righteous, mistaking cruelty for justice, transforming fear into religious ceremony. The bell tolls the hour across Blackmore village, its bronze voice carrying news of Sarah's guilt to all who care to hear. But it cannot carry the deeper truth that hangs over this scene like storm clouds gathering, that justice, real justice, remains as elusive as ever, hidden behind layers of ritual and tradition and desperate human need to believe that suffering serves some purpose higher than mere suffering. The counting house of Lord Aldwin the Bold sits like a canker at the heart of Westminster, its narrow windows gazing down upon the common folk with the cold calculation of a merchant weighing grain. Here, in chambers panelled with oak torn from forests that once sheltered Saxon kings, the true mathematics of medieval justice reveals itself, not in the balance of moral scales, but in the careful tallies of coin that can transform guilt into innocence, crime into mere misunderstanding, death sentences into opportunities for creative financing. Master Geoffrey Coinwright, the Lord's Treasurer, spreads ledger books across a table scarred by decades of desperate negotiations. His fingers, stained black with ink and yellowed from counting coins, trace entries that tell stories more revealing than any chronicle of battles or royal proclamations. Here, recorded in numbers that never lie, is the true history of justice in this realm, a marketplace where verdicts are commodities and righteousness is subject to fluctuations in price. Entry 743. He mutters to his scribe, a thin man whose eyes water constantly from squinting at figures by candlelight. Sir Edmund de Vere, accused of treason for harboring French spies. Fine paid, 200 marks of silver. Sentence, forgiven. Additional notes, substantial donation to Cathedral Building Fund forthcoming. The scribe's quill scratches against parchment, recording another transaction in the grand ledger of corrupted justice. Each entry represents a life saved or condemned not by the weight of evidence or the gravity of crime, but by the simple arithmetic of wealth and its absence. The rich purchase pardons while the poor purchase nothing but pain. In the cell beneath their feet, Sir Edmund paces the narrow confines of his temporary prison, counting not stones but gold pieces, calculating whether his remaining wealth can purchase not merely freedom but the restoration of his honor. The accusations against him are serious but fabricated, born from a rival's envy rather than treasonous activity. Yet in this world where truth is measured in monetary units, the authenticity of charges matters less than the authenticity of currency offered in response. The morning brings a parade of supplicants to Lord Aldwin's court, each clutching purses or deeds or promises, each hoping to transform disaster into mere inconvenience through the alchemy of bribery. Lady Margaret of Westshire arrives in a litter draped with silk, her jewelry glittering despite the grey light filtering through diamond-paned windows. Her crime, poisoning her husband's younger brother in a dispute over inheritance. Her offering, estates worth 3,000 marks and a pledge of continued loyalty to the crown. My lord, she begins, her voice honeyed with the confidence of one who has never known want. I trust that certain misunderstandings regarding my late brother-in-law's untimely demise can be resolved through appropriate contributions to worthy causes. Lord Aldwin studies her with the dispassionate gaze of a merchant evaluating livestock. He has presided over the purchase and sale of justice for so many years that moral considerations have withered like flowers in winter, leaving only the practical calculus of profit and loss. Her guilt or innocence interests him less than her ability to pay, her moral standing less than her political usefulness. The crown's expenses are considerable, he replies, his tone suggesting that mercy is indeed possible but will not come cheaply. The recent campaign in Scotland has depleted the treasury. The cathedral requires new stones after the fire. The poor need charity, though they rarely receive it. Perhaps your ladyship might see fit to address these pressing needs? The negotiation that follows would be grotesque if it were not so common, if it did not represent the daily reality of justice for those fortunate enough to afford it. They discuss murder as if it were a business transaction gone awry, poison as if it were a misunderstanding about contract terms, death as if it were merely an accounting error that proper payment could rectify. Meanwhile, in the common court below, Widow Alice stands before a different sort of justice entirely. Her crime, stealing turnips from Lord Aldwin's fields to feed children whose bones show through their skin like architectural features. Her offering, empty hands and empty purse, nothing but tears that have no purchasing power in this economy of mercy. The contrast could not be starker. Above, Lady Margaret haggles over the price of absolution like a housewife bargaining for fish at market. Below, Widow Alice faces the full weight of law applied without the cushion of wealth to soften its impact. Both have taken lives, one through poison, one through desperate theft, yet their fates will be determined not by the gravity of their sins but by the weight of their purses. Brother Francis, the court's chaplain, moves between these worlds like a ghost haunting scenes of his own moral failure. He has blessed the purchase of too many pardons, sanctified too many corrupt transactions, watched too many guilty rich men walk free while innocent poor ones face the scaffold. His faith, once firm as cathedral stone, has been eroded by the constant acid rain of witnessed injustice until only the hollow forms of belief remain. Lord Aldwyn, he ventures, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps in the case of the widow, some consideration might be given to her circumstances? 7 children, no husband, crops failed these 2 years running. The Lord's laugh is sharp as breaking glass. Brother Francis, surely you understand that mercy, like bread, must be paid for. The widow's circumstances concern me only insofar as they affect her ability to satisfy the Crown's requirements. Would you have me bankrupt the realm through excessive charity? The chaplain falls silent, understanding that in this place, compassion is regarded as a form of economic inefficiency, mercy as a luxury that the state cannot afford. He has learned to save his protests for his private prayers, where God might hear them but cannot respond with coin to make them effective. The ledger books tell their story in brutal clarity. Over the past 5 years, Lord Aldwyn's court has processed 1,247 cases of serious crime. Of these, 891 defendants possess sufficient wealth to negotiate alternative sentences. Their survival rate, 93%. Of the 356 defendants who face justice without financial resources, their survival rate tells a different story, 12%, and those who lived bore scars and missing limbs that served as permanent advertisements for the consequences of poverty. Master Geoffrey turns another page, revealing entries that would shame devils. William the Miller, accused of adultery with 3 women of noble birth. Payment received, 50 marks plus annual tribute of grain. Sentence, pilgrimage to local shrine, completed in 6 days. 2 pages later. Thomas Brewright, accused of adultery with baker's wife. Payment received, none. Sentence, castration and public flogging. Additional notes, died of wounds 3 days after punishment. The same crime, vastly different outcomes, the only variable being the content of their purses. This is the mathematics that governs medieval justice, not the complex calculations of moral philosophy, but the simple arithmetic of wealth and its absence. Justice wears a blindfold not to ensure impartiality, but to avoid seeing the coins that determine her verdicts. Lady Margaret's negotiation concludes with handshakes and documents sealed with wax. Her murder charge will be reduced to accidental death, her penalty commuted to generous donations spread across several worthy causes. She will endow a chapel, sponsor an orphanage, contribute to the cathedral's restoration fund. Her charity will be celebrated, her piety praised, her crime forgotten in the warmth of purchased righteousness. The irony is exquisite in its cruelty. The murderer becomes a patron saint of charitable giving, while the desperate mother who stole vegetables to prevent starvation becomes a symbol of criminal degradation. The poison that killed becomes sanctified through silver, while the hunger that drove theft remains unforgivable, unredeemable, unprofitable. Below in the common court, Widow Alice receives her sentence with the stoic resignation of one who expected nothing better. 50 lashes and loss of her right hand, the hand that reached for turnips when her children cried with empty bellies. She will be marked forever as a thief, unable to work, unable to provide, condemned to watch those same children starve more slowly but no less certainly than if she had never stolen at all. Brother Francis performs the ritual blessing of the sentence, his voice hollow as a tomb. He speaks of justice and divine will, of punishment fitting crime, of the necessity of example-making. But inside, his soul screams at the blasphemy he perpetrates, calling this corruption righteous, this cruelty just, this systematic oppression of the poor divinely ordained. The counting house empties as afternoon shadows lengthen across Westminster. Master Geoffrey tallies the day's transactions, 3 pardons purchased, 2 sentences commuted, 1 nobleman's reputation restored, 1 widow condemned. On the credit side, 400 marks of silver, 2 estates transferred, 1 cathedral donation, 1 orphanage endowment. On the debit side, the credibility of justice itself, sold so frequently, and so cheaply that it has become worthless. As evening falls, Lord Aldwyn retires to chambers furnished with wealth extracted from desperate souls seeking mercy. His walls display tapestries woven from threads of purchased pardons, his floors gleam with polish bought with blood money, his table groans under food paid for by the systematic sale of righteousness. He dines alone, attended only by servants who have learned not to see, not to hear, not to remember the daily commerce in human suffering that finances their master's comfort. In the cell below, Sir Edmund awaits word of his fate, knowing that his future depends not upon his innocence, which is complete, but upon his accountant's final calculations. His crime exists only in the imagination of enemies, but his punishment will be determined by mathematics that measure gold rather than guilt. And in a hovel across the city, 7 children huddle around a cold hearth, waiting for a mother who will return to them broken in body and spirit, marked forever as criminal for the crime of loving them enough to risk everything for their survival. They do not understand the economics that condemned her, cannot comprehend the system that transforms desperation into sin while sanctifying actual evil through strategic donations. The currency of mercy in medieval England was minted not in righteousness but in silver, not in divine justice but in human corruption. It purchased not salvation but the illusion of salvation, not true forgiveness but the temporary suspension of consequences for those wealthy enough to afford the payments. Brother Francis kneels in the chapel, praying for forgiveness he will never receive, seeking absolution for sins he commits daily in service to a system that has transformed the sacred into the commercial, the holy into the profitable. His prayers echo in empty air, for what God would listen to a priest who blesses injustice and calls it divine will? The ledger books remain open on Master Geoffrey's desk, their pages filled with the careful accounting of souls bought and sold, of justice transformed into commodity, of righteousness auctioned to the highest bidder. These are the true chronicles of medieval justice, not the heroic tales sung by bards, but the brutal arithmetic that reduced human dignity to monetary units and moral worth to market value. As midnight approaches and the last candles gutter in their holders, the counting house falls silent except for the scratch of quill on parchment, as Master Geoffrey records one final entry. Total receipts for justice rendered, 847 marks of silver. Total expenses for maintaining the appearance of righteousness, none. Net profit on the sale of divine judgment, incalculable. The currency of mercy flows like poisoned water through the foundations of medieval society, corrupting everything it touches, transforming courts into markets and judges into merchants of suffering. It is a system so perfectly calibrated to serve wealth and punish poverty that it operates with the efficiency of natural law, as inevitable as gravity, and equally indifferent to human protest. Tomorrow will bring new supplicants, new negotiations, new opportunities to demonstrate that in this world, justice belongs not to the righteous but to the rich, not to the innocent but to those who can afford to purchase innocence from those who control its definition. The scaffold rises from Tyburn's muddy ground like a wooden altar dedicated to society's darkest appetites, its timbers still wet with morning dew and something darker that speaks of yesterday's executions and tomorrow's inevitabilities. Around its base, merchants hawk their wares, blessed tokens to ease the passage to eternity, scraps of rope that will supposedly cure barrenness, vials of executioner's sweat guaranteed to ward off evil spirits. Death has become commerce, suffering transformed into entertainment, justice perverted into public spectacle. The crowd gathers before dawn, drawn by hunger deeper than that of empty bellies, the terrible human need to witness degradation worse than their own, to feel temporarily elevated by observing others fall further into the abyss. They come from every corner of London, nobles in silk and ermine claiming seats closest to the scaffold, merchants calculating the profit potential of execution day trading, craftsmen taking holiday from their workshops, beggars hoping that death's proximity might loosen purse strings and consciences. Brother Augustine, the abbey's youngest monk, clutches his prayer book with fingers that tremble despite his efforts at holy composure. This is his first execution, his first opportunity to offer final comfort to the condemned, His first lesson in how quickly righteous duty can transform into complicity in organized cruelty. The words of absolution feel heavy on his tongue, weighted with the knowledge that they serve more to ease the crowd's conscience than to provide genuine spiritual comfort. The prisoner cart approaches through streets lined with faces eager for spectacle. Its wheels creak against cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of such processions, each revolution marking another moment in the mechanical march towards state-sanctioned death. Inside the cart, 3 souls face their final mourning: Robert the cutler, condemned for killing a man who cheated him of 2 years' wages; Mary Whitehands, sentenced to burn for allegedly cursing her landlord's cattle; and young Peter, barely 16, whose crime was stealing a silver goblet to buy medicine for his dying sister. The difference in their bearing tells the story of how death takes people, some raging against the dying light, others surrendering to it with exhausted resignation, still others retreating so far within themselves that they seem already dead, their bodies merely mechanical shells going through the motions of their own destruction. Robert stares at the crowd with eyes that burn with undiminished fury. His crime was motivated not by evil but by desperation pushed beyond endurance. For 2 years he labored in Master William's workshop, creating knives and tools with skill that brought honor to the craft. When payment came due, Master William claimed poverty, produced doctored ledgers, swore sacred oaths that no money remained. But Robert saw the new tapestries adorning the master's hall, the jewels adorning his wife's throat, the feasts prepared for guests who celebrated the cutler's unpaid craftsmanship. "Look upon me!" Robert shouts to the assembled masses, his voice carrying across the square with the authority of approaching death. "See what becomes of honest men in a world where thieves wear crowns and murderers carry holy books. I killed 1 cheat and call it justice, while you watch 1,000 murders done by law and call it righteousness." His words hang in the morning air like smoke from a burning house, uncomfortable truths that the crowd came to escape, not to confront. They shift restlessly, murmuring prayers and curses in equal measure, wanting the spectacle to begin so that uncomfortable thoughts might be drowned in the visceral satisfaction of witnessing destruction. Mary Whitehands sits in terrible silence, her lips moving in prayers that seem to drain color from her face with each whispered word. Her condemnation rests upon the testimony of 3 witnesses who swore they heard her curse cattle that later sickened and died. The truth, that the cattle died of murrain that swept through half the shire, matters less than the community's need to blame someone for suffering that seems otherwise meaningless. She understands that she dies not for witchcraft but for the crime of being old, poor, and conveniently vulnerable when tragedy required explanation. Young Peter weeps without shame, his tears cutting channels through dirt that maps the geography of his brief, hard life. His sister died 3 days before his trial, the medicine he stole arriving too late to combat the fever that consumed her small body like fire-eating parchment. He stole for love and killed no one, yet faces the same death as murderers and traitors because the law recognizes no distinction between desperate affection and cold calculation. The executioner emerges from his hovel like a bear awakened from winter sleep. Master Thomas Hangman, for that has become his surname, the trade having consumed all other aspects of identity, carries tools polished to mirror brightness, their surfaces reflecting the crowd's faces and distorted images that seem more honest than reality. He has performed this ritual 837 times, and each execution has left him slightly less human, slightly more mechanical, a creature shaped by society's need for someone willing to kill in the name of justice. The scaffold creaks under the weight of ceremony and bodies. Officials arrange themselves according to protocols established by centuries of organized death. The judge who pronounces final words, the priest who offers hollow comfort, the recorder who will transform this morning's killing into legal documentation. Each plays a role in the grand theater that transforms murder into justice, cruelty into righteousness, state violence into divine will. Sheriff Godwin unfurls his scroll and begins the ritual recitation of crimes and punishments, his voice competing with wind that seems to whisper protests against the proceedings. The legal language transforms human tragedy into bureaucratic procedure, reducing Robert's desperation to willful murder, Mary's vulnerability to consorting with dark forces, Peter's love to theft of property belonging to the crown. But beneath the formal words lies darker truth. This spectacle serves functions that transcend justice. It provides entertainment for masses whose lives contain little enough joy that they find pleasure and others pain. It demonstrates the consequences of challenging authority, discouraging rebellion through systematic terror. It creates community through shared witness of sanctified violence, bonding spectators in complicity that makes them stakeholders in the system that oppresses them. The hangman's assistants prepare their apparatus with the precision of craftsmen who take pride in their work. The ropes are tested, the trapdoor mechanisms oiled, the positioning calculated to ensure death comes neither too quickly nor too slowly, quick enough to prevent excessive suffering that might generate sympathy, slow enough to provide adequate spectacle for an audience that has paid in attendance if not in coin. Mary Whitehands is led to the stake first, her condemnation requiring fire rather than rope, flame rather than strangulation. The wood has been stacked with expert knowledge of how fire travels, how long different timbers burn, how to ensure maximum efficiency in the transformation of living flesh into ash and memory. The symbolism is deliberate. Witchcraft must be purged by purification's opposite, cleansed through the same element that supposedly gave it power. Brother Augustine approaches with oil for final anointing, his hands steady despite the nausea that rises in his throat like bile. He has memorized the prescribed words, practiced the gestures, prepared himself for this moment when theory becomes terrible reality. But no amount of theological training prepared him for the smell of fierce sweat, the sound of whispered prayers to gods who seem absent from this place, the sight of human dignity being systematically dismantled by legal procedure. Mary Whitehands, he begins, his voice barely audible above the crowd's restless murmur. Do you confess your sins and accept Christ's mercy in your final hour? I confess nothing, she replies, her voice stronger than her frail body suggests possible. For I have done nothing. But I accept whatever mercy remains in this world, though it seems in short supply among those who speak most loudly of its virtues. Her words carry across the square with startling clarity, cutting through the noise like blade through silk. For a moment, uncomfortable silence falls over the assembled crowd as they confront the possibility that they witness not justice but murder, not divine judgment but human error dressed in ceremonial robes. The moment passes quickly, dissolved by Sheriff Godwin's practiced voice resuming the ritual of condemnation. The legal machinery rolls forward with inexorable momentum, crushing doubt beneath the weight of procedure and precedent. The torch is lit, approaching the kindling with steady purpose, its flame dancing like a pagan spirit celebrating sacrifice. What follows cannot be described in words that preserve human dignity or reader's peace. The medieval crowd watches with fascination that reveals humanity's capacity for finding entertainment in others' anguish, for transforming suffering into spectacle, for mistaking cruelty for justice when it serves their psychological needs for order and meaning. Robert's execution follows different protocols but serves identical functions. The rope embraces his neck like a lover's caress turned deadly, while his final words echo across London with prophetic power. This scaffold will know many more innocent necks before justice learns to distinguish between crime and desperation, between evil and poverty, between guilt and mere misfortune. Young Peter dies last, his youth making even this hardened crowd uncomfortable, his tears serving as unwelcome reminder that justice sometimes devours children along with criminals, innocence along with guilt. His sister's name forms his final word, spoken not in grief but in explanation, as if death might somehow reunite them, as if love might prove stronger than law. The scaffold empties as afternoon shadows lengthen across Tyburn's blood-soaked ground. Merchants pack their unsold wares, officials file their reports, crowds disperse to alehouses where they will relive the morning's excitement over tankards of beer and increasingly elaborate descriptions of what they witnessed. Brother Augustine walks away with prayer book clutched against his chest like armor against the doubts that assault his faith. He has seen justice performed, but what he witnessed looked remarkably like its opposite: systematic cruelty disguised as righteousness, state murder masquerading as divine will, society's need for spectacle satisfied at the cost of human dignity. The scaffold stands empty now, its timbers already being prepared for tomorrow's performance, next week's exhibition, next month's demonstration that authority will not be challenged without consequence. It is theater that never ends, drama that requires constant casting of new victims to satisfy audiences whose appetite for suffering seems insatiable as long as that suffering belongs to others. Master Thomas Hangman returns to his hovel, adding 3 more tallies to the wall where he records his life's work in simple marks that reduce human beings to statistical entries. 840 executions now, with no end in sight, no retirement possible from work that has made him wealthy in coin and bankrupt in spirit. The blood soaks slowly into Tyburn's earth, joining that of thousands who preceded today's victims and thousands more who will follow. The ground has grown rich from this constant feeding, its soil dark and fertile with the remains of those who challenged authority, offended sensibility, or simply found themselves too poor to purchase alternatives to death. As night falls over London, the theatre of pain concludes another performance, its curtain drawn across scenes of systematic cruelty that society has learned to mistake for justice, organized violence that communities have taught themselves to call righteousness. Tomorrow will bring new performers, new audiences, new opportunities to demonstrate that in this world, power makes its own morality and writes its own definitions of crime and punishment. The medieval scaffold was more than mere execution device. It was altar, theater, and symbol combined, serving society's need to transform murder into ritual, cruelty into ceremony, injustice into entertainment. Around its base, civilization revealed its true face, not the noble visage it claimed in laws and proclamations, but the savage mask it wore when it gathered to watch its own members die for the crime of being powerless in a world that worshipped only power. In the shadow of Westminster's great tower, where kings have held court since the Conqueror's blood still ran warm in Norman veins, King Edward sits upon the throne of judgment like a man carrying the accumulated weight of 10,000 verdicts. His crown, forged from gold torn from Welsh mountains and gems ripped from Scottish soil, catches candlelight and throws it back in patterns that dance across walls carved with the names of those who displeased previous monarchs, names that serve as permanent reminder of what happens when royal mercy runs dry. The king's face bears lines etched not by age but by the constant pressure of decisions that transform subjects into corpses, citizens into cautionary tales, human beings into entries in the great ledger of royal justice. Each wrinkle maps a verdict rendered, each shadow tells the story of mercy granted or withheld, each muscle holds tension accumulated from years of wielding power that corrupts not through malice but through the simple mathematics of absolute authority unopposed by meaningful restraint. Before him kneels Sir Marquis de Beaumont, once the flower of English knighthood, now reduced to trembling supplicant awaiting judgment for crimes that exist more in political necessity than in objective reality. His alleged treason consists of letters, possibly forged, suggesting communication with French agents, evidence so circumstantial that no honest court would convict a commoner, yet sufficient to justify the elimination of a rival whose growing influence threatens established power structures. Marcus, the king speaks, his voice carrying the weariness of Solomon asked to solve problems that have no righteous solutions. We have been friends since boyhood, companions in war and peace, brothers in all but blood. Yet here you kneel before us, accused of betraying the very realm you helped defend, the very crown you swore to serve. The knight raises eyes that once blazed with confidence but now flicker with the desperate calculation of a man measuring his words against his life. My lord, my king, my friend, whatever letters bear my name were not written by my hand, whatever plots they describe were not conceived by my mind, whatever treachery they suggest was not committed by my heart. Truth and falsehood dance together in the throne room like lovers who cannot decide whether to embrace or kill each other. The king knows, as all who witness this scene know, that Sir Marcus speaks honestly, that the evidence was manufactured by enemies who understand that royal justice cares less about guilt than about convenience, less about truth than about political utility. But knowledge of innocence provides cold comfort when weighed against the warm necessity of political survival. The French grow bold along the northern borders, the Welsh stir restlessly in their mountain fastnesses, the Scottish send envoys bearing gifts that look suspiciously like bribes. In such times, kings cannot afford the luxury of friends who might become rivals, allies who possess independent power, knights whose loyalty might waver if offered sufficient inducement. Chancellor William approaches the throne with documents that will transform this personal tragedy into legal procedure, friendship into state business, murder into justice. His face wears the carefully neutral expression of one who has learned to navigate the treacherous waters of royal favor, who understands that survival depends upon serving power rather than truth, upon satisfying political necessity rather than moral requirement. Your Majesty, he begins, his voice pitched to carry across the throne room without seeming to proclaim the terrible words he must speak. The evidence, while complex in its implications, suggests patterns of correspondence that could be interpreted as treasonous if viewed through the lens of prudent suspicion. The language itself reveals the corruption at the heart of royal justice. Evidence suggests patterns could be interpreted. Suspicion is elevated to the status of prudent policy. Truth becomes malleable, reality subject to interpretation, guilt a matter of perspective rather than fact. In the hands of clever lawyers and compliant judges, any action can be transformed into crime, any loyalty redefined as treachery, any friendship reconsidered as threat. King Edward understands the game he plays, recognizes the terrible mathematics that govern royal decision-making. Spare Sir Marcus and face whispered accusations of weakness, of allowing sentiment to override judgment, of placing personal affection above royal duty. Condemn him and purchase temporary security at the cost of permanent moral corruption, buying political advantage with the currency of murdered friendship. The courtiers who line the throne room walls stand like shadows cast by flickering candles, their faces reflecting the complex calculations that govern survival and proximity to absolute power. They have witnessed this scene before, will witness it again, understand that they observe not justice but its opposite, the systematic transformation of moral choice into political necessity, of human relationships into instruments of statecraft. Duke Robert of Lancaster whispers to Earl Thomas of Gloucester, their conversation too quiet for royal ears but loud enough to demonstrate their lack of concern for the proceedings. They discuss not guilt or innocence but betting odds, wagering on whether the king's need for an example will outweigh his sentimental attachment to childhood friendship. To them, Sir Marcus represents not a human being facing death but a gained piece in the larger contest for royal favor and political position. Lady Catherine de Montfort observes from the gallery reserved for noble women, her presence serving multiple functions, witness to royal justice, ornament to royal court, and reminder that even in matters of life and death, proper ceremony must be maintained. Her jewelry catches torchlight and throws it back in patterns that seem to mock the gravity of the proceedings, suggesting that to those sufficiently elevated by wealth and birth, even execution becomes merely another form of entertainment. The king's own thoughts remain hidden beneath the mask of royal composure, but his fingers drum against the throne's armrest in rhythms that speak of internal conflict. He remembers Sir Marcus as a boy of 12, brave enough to challenge older squires who mocked Edward's stutter. He remembers the night's wedding day, when joy transformed his usually serious face into something almost divine. He remembers battlefields where Marcus stood between the crown and death, shields raised and swords ready, loyalty proven in blood and steel. But memory offers poor counsel when weighed against the practical requirements of maintaining power in a world where weakness invites destruction, where mercy is interpreted as vulnerability, where friendship becomes liability and loyalty transforms into threat. The king who spares enemies may find himself surrounded by them. The monarch who values personal relationships above political necessity may discover that both relationships and throne vanish together. Brother Paul, the court chaplain, approaches the throne bearing oils for final anointing, his presence serving as reminder that even royal justice requires divine sanction, or at least the appearance thereof. His face reflects the moral contortions required of those who serve both God and earthly power, who must bless decisions that would horrify their Savior, who must transform murder into martyrdom through the alchemy of ritualized prayer. My lord, the chaplain ventures, his voice barely audible above the whisper of silk garments and the crackle of torches. Perhaps mercy might serve your Majesty's interests as well as alternative measures. The people love displays of royal compassion, and Sir Marcus's family has served the crown faithfully for 3 generations. The suggestion hangs in the air like incense, sweet with the possibility of redemption but ultimately powerless against the harsher realities of political calculation. The king's response comes not in words but in the subtle tightening of facial muscles, the barely perceptible shake of the head, the royal equivalent of doors slamming shut on hope. Chancellor William unfurls the document that will formalize Sir Marcus's doom, its parchment made from skin that once covered living flesh, its ink mixed from materials that speak of violence transformed into law. The words written there possess power greater than swords or armies, the power to redefine reality, to make guilt from innocence, to transform friendship into treason through the simple expedient of royal signature. Sir Marcus de Beaumont, the Chancellor intones, his voice carrying across the throne room with the authority of centuries of legal precedent. You stand accused of high treason, of corresponding with enemies of the realm, of plotting against your sovereign lord and the peace of his kingdom. How do you answer these charges? The knight's response requires courage that transcends physical bravery, moral strength that exceeds the demands of battlefield heroism. To proclaim innocence is to call the king's justice false. To admit guilt is to validate his own execution. He chooses a third path, one that acknowledges both truth and political necessity while preserving what dignity remains available to the condemned. I answer that I have served my king and my country with all the strength of my body and all the loyalty of my heart. Sir Marcus replies, his voice steady despite the knowledge that his words serve as his own funeral oration. If that service has been misunderstood, if that loyalty has been misinterpreted, then I submit to my sovereign's judgment, while maintaining before God and my own conscience that I have committed no treason save in the fevered imagination of those who see conspiracy in every shadow. The king rises from his throne with movements that seem to carry the weight of ages, each gesture deliberate and heavy with significance. His crown catches torchlight and throws it back in patterns that illuminate not glory but burden, not triumph, but the terrible loneliness of absolute power exercised in service to political necessity rather than moral truth. Sir Marcus de Beaumont, King Edward pronounces, his voice carrying across the throne room and beyond, into the corridors where servants listen and into the streets where subjects wait for news of how their sovereign dispenses justice. You have been found guilty of high treason against our person and our realm. It is our judgment that you shall suffer death by beheading, your estates forfeit to the crown, your name stricken from the rolls of honor. The sentence falls like thunder in the sudden silence, its echoes reverberating through chambers that have heard similar words pronounced against hundreds of men whose only crime was possessing something their king desired, wealth, land, influence, or simply the inconvenient habit of breathing while politically problematic. Sir Marcus receives his death sentence with the composure of one who recognized its inevitability long before entering the throne room. His bow to the king carries no bitterness, only the profound sadness of friendship sacrificed to political expediency, of loyalty repaid with systematic betrayal, of service rewarded with legalized murder. As guards lead the condemned knight away, his footsteps echo against stone floors worn smooth by centuries of similar processions. The sound seems to mock the pretense of justice, to reveal the hollow nature of royal mercy, to demonstrate that in this world where crowns confer divinity and thrones transform their occupants into instruments of organized cruelty, friendship becomes liability and loyalty transforms into threat. The courtiers dispersed to their various entertainments and intrigues, their conversation already turning from Sir Marcus's fate to speculation about who might fill the vacant positions his death creates. To them, execution represents not tragedy but opportunity, not moral horror but political vacancy waiting to be filled by whoever possesses sufficient cunning and adequate ruthlessness to seize advantage from another's destruction. King Edward remains alone upon his throne, surrounded by advisers who speak only words he wishes to hear, protected by guards who serve gold rather than conscience, ruling subjects who obey from fear rather than love. The crown upon his head weighs heavier with each verdict rendered, each friend condemned, each act of political necessity that requires the sacrifice of moral principle upon the altar of royal survival. In the cells beneath the palace, Sir Marcus awaits dawn and the executioner's blade, his thoughts dwelling not upon the injustice of his fate but upon the tragedy of his king's transformation from friend into executioner, from companion into killing machine, from human being into the mechanical dispenser of legalized murder. He understands that he dies not for treason but for the crime of inspiring affection in a monarch who can no longer afford the luxury of human emotion. The weight of crowns is measured not in gold but in the accumulated moral corruption required to maintain them, not in jewels but in the lives sacrificed to political necessity, not in ceremony but in the systematic transformation of rulers into monsters who murder friends and call it justice, who destroy loyalty and name it reason, who mistake fear for respect and isolation for security. As midnight approaches and the palace settles into the uneasy quiet of power sleeping fitfully, King Edward stares through windows that offer views of a realm maintained through systematic terror, held together by the careful cultivation of fear, governed through the constant demonstration that friendship means nothing when weighed against political advantage. His crown catches moonlight and throws it back in patterns that seem to mock the very concept of justice, revealing that in this world, righteousness belongs not to the right but to those with sufficient power to define what rightness means. The great bells of Westminster toll the hour of judgment with voices that seem to carry the accumulated weight of centuries, their bronze tongues speaking truths that human lips dare not utter in this place where power writes its own moral laws and authority creates its own definitions of justice. Dawn breaks reluctantly over London, its pale light filtering through storm clouds that hang above the city like divine displeasure made manifest, casting shadows that seem to move independently of the objects that create them. In the tower's deepest dungeon, where stones weep moisture that tastes of human tears and darkness has weight sufficient to crush hope, the last prisoners await their final summons. They represent every stratum of medieval society, nobleman and peasant, merchant and monk, knight and commoner, united at last by the great equalizer that reduces all human pretension to the same terminus. Death, it seems, is the only true democracy in a world otherwise defined by rigid hierarchy and systematic oppression. Sir Marcus de Beaumont sits in meditation that transcends prayer, his mind dwelling not upon the injustice of his fate, but upon the larger patterns that his death serves to illustrate. He has come to understand that his execution functions as punctuation mark in a longer sentence, a grammatical necessity that clarifies the meaning of royal power through demonstration rather than explanation. His death will teach lessons that no living voice could convey about the price of challenging authority, the cost of independent thought, the danger of friendship with those who mistake personal affection for political alliance. Beside him, separated by bars but united in doom, huddles Dame Eleanor Fitzwater, whose crime was operating a scriptorium where books were copied without royal license, where knowledge was preserved and transmitted outside official channels. Her offense against the established order was not violent rebellion but intellectual independence, the dangerous notion that wisdom belonged to humanity rather than to those who claimed divine right to control its distribution. The third prisoner, Brother Benedict of Northumbria, faces execution for the most terrible crime of all in medieval England, the heresy of suggesting that God's love might extend even to the poor, that Christ's mercy might encompass those who challenge earthly authority, that righteousness might sometimes require disobedience to unjust laws. His sermons attracted crowds that worried bishops and threatened nobles, his words spreading like wildfire through communities starved for hope and desperate for validation of their suffering. Together, these three condemned souls represent the trinity of threats that medieval authority could not tolerate: political independence, intellectual freedom, and spiritual authenticity. Their destruction serves notice that such dangerous concepts must be eliminated root and branch, that society requires not just the death of troublemakers but the systematic suppression of the ideas that create troublemakers in the first place. Above them, in chambers where tapestries conceal walls built from the bones of earlier victims, King Edward receives the morning reports from sheriffs and bailiffs, constables and executioners, all the various functionaries whose daily labor maintains the machinery of organized oppression. The numbers they recite tell stories more revealing than any chronicle: 43 executions this month, 112 mutilations, over 300 imprisonments, thousands of fines extracted from families already starving, countless lives destroyed to maintain the illusion of order. "Your Majesty," Sheriff Aldwin reports, his voice carrying the satisfaction of quotas met and problems solved through systematic application of violence, "the harvest of justice has been abundant. The realm grows more peaceful with each passing day, the subjects more obedient with each demonstration of royal resolve. But peace purchased through terror is not peace at all. It is silence imposed by fear, compliance extracted through systematic brutality, order maintained by transforming entire populations into prisoners too frightened to challenge their captors. The king's realm may appear tranquil to those who observe from positions of safety and privilege, but beneath that deceptive calm seethes the slow-burning anger of those who have learned to hate in silence, to plan revenge in whispers, to dream of justice in the darkness where royal authority cannot penetrate. The morning progresses through its predetermined stages like a religious service dedicated to the worship of power itself. Documents are signed that transform living beings into legal abstractions, warrants issued that authorize the systematic destruction of human dignity, orders given that will ripple outward from London to every corner of the realm, carrying news that authority admits no challenge and permits no dissent. Master Geoffrey Coinwright enters the royal presence bearing ledger books that record the financial benefits of judicial murder, the monetary advantages of systematic oppression, the profitable nature of fear-based governance. His figures demonstrate that terror pays dividends, that cruelty generates revenue, that the careful cultivation of suffering produces wealth for those positioned to harvest it. "Your Majesty will be pleased to learn," he announces with the pride of an accountant who has discovered new efficiencies in an already profitable enterprise, "that this quarter's judicial proceedings have generated revenues exceeding all previous records. The Crown's treasury swells with the fruits of justice properly administered. The obscenity of reducing human tragedy to profit margins, of measuring moral corruption in monetary units, of transforming systematic oppression into successful business model reveals the final truth about medieval justice, that it served not righteousness but greed, not divine will but earthly appetite, not the cause of order but the demands of those whose comfort required others' suffering." In the courtyard below, preparations for the day's executions proceed with mechanical efficiency born of constant practice and refined through endless repetition. The scaffold stands ready, its timbers freshly oiled and tested, its mechanisms checked and double-checked by craftsmen who take professional pride in ensuring that death comes neither too quickly nor too slowly, either too mercifully nor too cruelly, but with precisely the degree of suffering calculated to provide maximum deterrent effect while maintaining the appearance of civilized procedure. The crowd gathers as it has gathered for centuries, drawn by appetites they dare not examine too closely, hungering for spectacle that allows them to feel temporarily elevated above the condemned while remaining safely distant from questions about the justice of what they witness. They represent every class and condition of medieval society, united in complicity that makes them stakeholders in the system of organized cruelty, they have come to observe. But today something different disturbs the familiar ritual. As Sir Marcus emerges from the tower to begin his final journey, a sound rises from the crowd that has never been heard at English executions, not the usual roar of bloodthirsty approval, not the satisfied murmur of justice served, but something darker and more dangerous, the low, angry grumble of people beginning to question whether what they witness represents justice or its opposite. The change is subtle but unmistakable to those trained to read the mood of crowds. Where previous executions generated enthusiasm for the righteousness of royal authority, this one produces unease, doubt, whispered questions about whether the condemned might be more innocent than those who condemned them. The people have begun to recognize that they witness not the triumph of good over evil, but the systematic destruction of anyone who dares suggest that good might exist independently of royal definition. Brother Benedict walks to his death with serenity that seems to illuminate the morning darkness, his face bearing expression of one who has glimpsed truths that transcend mortality, and found them worth dying to preserve. His final words echo across London with prophetic power that no authority can silence through execution, no power can suppress through systematic violence. You may destroy our bodies, but you cannot kill the ideas that live beyond flesh, the hopes that survive beyond breath, the justice that exists beyond your ability to corrupt it. What you do this day in the name of order will serve only to demonstrate that true order comes not from fear but from righteousness, not from power but from mercy, not from authority but from love. The monk's execution proceeds with all the ceremony that medieval society could muster, but his words continue echoing long after his voice falls silent, spreading through the crowd like seeds scattered on fertile ground, taking root in hearts and minds that have been prepared by suffering to receive radical notions about justice and mercy, about the relationship between divine will and earthly authority, about the possibility that righteousness might sometimes require resistance to unjust laws. Dame Eleanor faces her death with the quiet dignity of one who has spent her life preserving knowledge for future generations, understanding that ideas prove more durable than those who suppress them, that truth survives longer than those who attempt to bury it beneath systematic lies. Her scriptorium may be destroyed, her books burned, her scribes scattered, but the words she helped preserve will find new voices, new hands to write them, new hearts to embrace them. Sir Marcus mounts the scaffold with the composure of one who recognizes that his death serves purposes larger than personal tragedy, that his execution functions as catalyst for changes he will not live to witness but which his sacrifice helps to make inevitable. His friendship with the king, betrayed and murdered for political convenience, becomes symbol of all the relationships destroyed by power's appetite for self-preservation, all the loyalty sacrificed on authority's altar, all the human bonds severed by the machinery of systematic oppression. As the three condemned souls face their final moments, storm clouds gather overhead with supernatural intensity, as if nature itself protests the perverted spectacle unfolding below. Thunder rumbles across London like divine disapproval made audible, lightning splits the sky like heaven's own judgment upon earthly injustice. Rain begins to fall like tears shed by angels forced to witness the systematic transformation of divine justice into human cruelty. The executions proceed despite the storm, authority demonstrating its determination to complete its bloody work regardless of natural omens or supernatural protests. But the weather serves as unwelcome reminder that there are powers beyond human control, forces that cannot be bribed or threatened or systematically suppressed, truths that survive longer than those who attempt to silence them. As the three condemned souls face their final moments, storm clouds gather overhead with supernatural intensity, as if nature itself protests the perverted spectacle unfolding below. Thunder rumbles across London like divine disapproval made audible, lightning splits the sky like heaven's own judgment upon earthly injustice. Rain begins to fall like tears shed by angels forced to witness the systematic transformation of divine justice into human cruelty. The executions proceed despite the storm, authority demonstrating its determination to complete its bloody work regardless of natural omens or supernatural protests. But the weather serves as unwelcome reminder that there are powers beyond human control, forces that cannot be bribed or threatened or systematically suppressed, truths that survive longer than those who attempt to silence them. As the last condemned soul surrenders life to the executioner's blade, a sound rises from the crowd that chills royal observers more than thunder or lightning ever could, not the satisfied roar of bloodlust fulfilled, not the enthusiastic approval of justice served, but the profound silence of people beginning to understand that what they have witnessed represents not righteousness triumphant, but innocence systematically destroyed. Not divine judgment, but human corruption dressed in ceremonial robes. The silence spreads outward from the scaffold like ripples from a stone dropped into still water, touching first those closest to the terrible spectacle, then moving through the crowd like infection, transforming witnesses from enthusiastic supporters of royal justice into uncomfortable participants in legalized murder. From believers in the righteousness of authority into doubters who question whether power and righteousness have anything in common beyond their mutual claims to divine sanction. King Edward observes this transformation from his elevated position, recognizing with the instincts of one born to rule that something fundamental has shifted in the relationship between authority and those it governs. The executions have achieved their immediate purpose: 3 troublemakers eliminated, 3 sources of dangerous ideas silenced, 3 examples made for any who might consider similar challenges to established order. But they have also accomplished something unintended and far more dangerous. They have revealed the arbitrary nature of royal justice, the thin veneer of righteousness that conceals systematic oppression, the profound gulf between divine will and earthly authority. Master Thomas Hangman cleans his tools with mechanical precision, adding 3 more tallies to the wall where he records his life's work in simple marks that transform human beings into statistical entries. 843 executions now, each one leaving him slightly less human and slightly more instrumental, a creature shaped by society's need for someone willing to kill in the name of justice while remaining sufficiently apart from society to bear the psychological burden of that killing. But even the executioner, inured to suffering through constant exposure and numb to moral considerations through professional necessity, recognizes that today's killings possessed qualities that distinguish them from routine judicial murder. The condemned died with serenity that suggested they possessed truths their killers lacked, faced eternity with confidence that implied their judges faced something very different, surrendered life with dignity that revealed the profound indignity of those who took it from them. The scaffold stands empty now, its timbers already being prepared for tomorrow's performance. But the questions it raised continue echoing through London's streets like church bells that toll not celebration but warning. In taverns and workshops, in guild halls and monasteries, in the hovels of the poor and the mansions of the rich, voices whisper dangerous thoughts about the relationship between law and justice, between authority and righteousness, between divine will and royal convenience. The Royal Council convenes in emergency session as afternoon shadows lengthen across Westminster, their faces reflecting awareness that something has changed in the delicate balance between rulers and ruled, that the executions intended to reinforce authority may have instead undermined it. They speak in careful euphemisms about public mood and social stability, avoiding direct acknowledgement that their system of government through systematic terror may have reached the limits of its effectiveness. Your Majesty, Chancellor William ventures, his voice carrying the caution of one who must deliver unwelcome news to absolute authority. Perhaps some consideration might be given to alternative approaches to maintaining order. The people seem unsettled by recent events. The euphemisms cannot disguise the underlying truth, that terror, like any tool, loses effectiveness through overuse, that fear transforms into anger when pushed beyond certain limits, that authority maintained through systematic oppression eventually faces systematic resistance from those with nothing left to lose. The very success of royal justice in eliminating dissent has created conditions that breed more dangerous forms of opposition. Duke Robert of Lancaster shifts uncomfortably in his seat, his mind calculating the political implications of popular unrest, the financial costs of increased security measures, the military requirements for suppressing rebellion should whispered doubts transform into open revolt. His wealth depends upon stability, his comfort requires order, his survival demands that the machinery of oppression continue functioning smoothly regardless of its human costs. Perhaps, he suggests with the careful tone of one testing dangerous waters, some gesture of royal mercy might serve to reassure the commons that their sovereign remains mindful of their welfare. A reduction in taxes, perhaps, or pardons for minor offenses, or increased charity for the poor. The suggestions reveal the fundamental bankruptcy of a system that mistakes symptoms for causes, that attempts to treat popular unrest through superficial reforms while maintaining the underlying structures of systematic oppression. Mercy offered after injustice serves only to highlight the arbitrary nature of both. Charity dispensed after cruelty merely emphasizes the voluntariness of compassion. Pardons granted after systematic persecution demonstrate the capricious character of royal authority. But King Edward understands truths his advisers dare not voice, that authority, once revealed as arbitrary, cannot reclaim legitimacy through gestures of beneficence, that justice, once exposed as systematic oppression disguised by legal procedure, cannot restore credibility through occasional acts of mercy, that power, once demonstrated to serve only itself, cannot purchase genuine loyalty through strategic displays of charity. The storm outside intensifies as if nature itself responds to the moral corruption it witnesses, wind howling through London's streets like the voices of all those who died for challenging authority, rain lashing against windows like tears shed by heaven for earthly injustice, thunder rumbling across the sky like divine warning that human power must eventually answer to higher judgment. In the Tower's dungeons, where new prisoners already await their turns at royal justice, conversations take place that would terrify authorities if they could hear them. The condemned speak not of personal grievances or individual sufferings but of larger patterns they have recognized, systemic problems they have identified, fundamental contradictions between royal claims and royal actions that can no longer be ignored or explained away through theological sophistries. "We die," whispers Dame Margaret of Westbridge, condemned for operating a school where poor children learn to read. "But the ideas we die for cannot be killed by executioners. Knowledge spreads like plague, hope infects like fever, justice propagates like wildfire through communities prepared by suffering to receive it." Her words carry through stone walls and iron bars, reaching ears that royal authority cannot control, taking root in minds that systematic oppression has prepared to embrace radical notions about the relationship between earthly power and divine justice, between human law and moral truth, between authorities' claims and authorities' actions. The medieval world teeters on the edge of transformations that will reshape not merely law and government, but the fundamental assumptions about power and its proper relationship to those it governs. The executions meant to demonstrate royal authority's limitless reach have instead revealed its essential limitations, its dependence upon popular acquiescence, its vulnerability to the simple but revolutionary idea that legitimacy flows from righteousness rather than force. As midnight approaches and London settles into uneasy sleep punctuated by thunder that seems to carry voices of the executed dead, King Edward sits alone in chambers hung with tapestries that cannot muffle the sound of his own conscience awakening after years of systematic corruption. He has achieved everything he sought: absolute power, unchallenged authority, the ability to transform will into law through simple decree, yet finds himself ruling over a realm that grows more unstable with each demonstration of his control. The crown upon his head weighs heavier than ever, its gold grown cold as the blood of friends sacrificed to political necessity, its jewels reflecting light that seems tainted by the moral darkness required to maintain royal authority. He rules through fear, governs through systematic oppression, maintains order through the careful cultivation of terror, yet discovers that such methods ultimately destroy the very thing they claim to preserve. Power exercised without moral restraint becomes indistinguishable from tyranny. Authority maintained through systematic injustice loses all claim to legitimacy. Government based upon organized oppression creates its own opposition through the simple process of revealing what it truly serves. The king who sought absolute control finds himself controlling only the mechanisms of his own eventual destruction, ruling only until those he oppresses discover their collective strength exceeds his individual power. The medieval system of justice, revealed in its full corruption and arbitrary cruelty, stands exposed as elaborate fraud perpetrated upon populations too oppressed to resist, and too fragmented to organize effective opposition. But fragmentation proves temporary, oppression breeds its own resistance, and fraud eventually encounters truth that no amount of systematic violence can permanently suppress. The great bells of Westminster toll midnight with voices that seem to announce not merely the passage of time but the passage of ages, the transition from one era to another, the slow but inexorable movement from darkness toward light. Their bronze tongues speak prophecies that no royal decree can silence, truths that no executioner can kill, justice that no corruption can permanently obscure. In the shadow of the scaffold, where blood still stains the earth dark and rich with the remains of systematic murder, something new stirs in the London air, not the familiar scent of fear that has perfumed royal authority for centuries, but something cleaner and more dangerous, the smell of change brewing like storm winds, of revolution germinating like seeds planted in soil fertilized by the decomposing remains of judicial victims, of justice preparing to reclaim its name from those who have used it to disguise its opposite. The dark truth about medieval justice stands revealed in all its terrible clarity. It was never about justice at all, but about power and its maintenance, about order and its preservation, about authority and its protection from challenges that might reveal its essential illegitimacy. The elaborate rituals, the ceremonial procedures, the theological justifications, all serve to disguise systematic oppression as divine will, organized cruelty as moral necessity, legalized murder as righteous judgment. But truth, once revealed, cannot be unrevealed. Justice, once properly understood, cannot be misunderstood again. Corruption, once exposed to light, withers like fungus removed from darkness. The medieval world has looked upon its own face in the mirror of systematic cruelty, and seen something that will haunt its dreams and disturb its sleep until fundamental changes transform nightmare into something approaching actual justice. The reckoning has begun, though it will take centuries to complete. The seeds planted by today's executions will grow in soil watered by tears and fertilized by blood, sprouting into ideas that challenge authority, concepts that question power, principles that demand accountability from those who claim to serve justice while systematically destroying it. The future will remember this day not for the 3 lives ended but for the thousands of lives that will be saved when humanity finally learns to distinguish between justice and its counterfeit, between divine will and earthly appetite, between legitimate authority and organized oppression wearing legal disguises. The storm passes, leaving London washed clean by rain that seemed to carry the accumulated tears of centuries, the sky cleared of clouds that hung like judgment over earthly corruption. Dawn will come with light that reveals not the glory of absolute power but its essential emptiness, not the triumph of royal authority but its fundamental bankruptcy, not the success of systematic oppression but its ultimate failure to achieve anything except its own eventual destruction. The dark truth about medieval justice has been told, its secrets revealed, its corruption exposed. What remains is the slow work of building something better from the ruins of what came before. Justice that serves truth rather than power, authority that derives legitimacy from righteousness rather than force, government that protects the innocent rather than systematically destroying them for the crime of challenging injustice. The chronicle ends, but the story continues in every heart that refuses to mistake cruelty for justice, in every voice that speaks truth to power, in every soul that recognizes divine justice as something infinitely higher and holier than the systematic corruption that medieval authorities dared to call by its sacred name.